Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery, and this bin that you see right here is my lucky Friday the 13th bin. It just happened to be a Friday the 13th when this bin was launched off, and I just figured I'd put the word Friday in there just as a little reminder that it was launched off on a, I guess, superstition says it's an unlucky day or whatever, but that's the system we're going to be checking in on today. It's now 20 days of age, and it's received 2 feedings. The first feeding was when we first loaded it with worms originally, the first batch of worms, and later on, 10 days later, we loaded in a few other worms, and a second feeding was applied when that second batch of worms were loaded in. But we're not adding any more worms, but we are going to feed. So I'm going to get that thing up on the bench, and we're going to get to work. So now, as you can expect, since each time the system was fed, or each time it was featured in a video, there were worms getting added. The focal point of that video was actually the collection of the worms, and then at the end, the release of the worms into the system. But it was never an in-depth look at this system per se. It was always kind of just the receiving end of what the video had been, which was mainly focused on collecting up the worms to be placed into here. Now this is just going to become the star of the show, now that there's no more worms to be moved into here. So let's get this thing over here onto the bench so you can better see what we're working on. There's an estimated, let me show you. Ta-da! Yeah, you probably knew what I was going to do. You knew I was going to get out my little information board here, but where is it? Here it is. So now we're up to a count of 829 worms. There was an estimated 397 worms on the first haul out of worms from their nursery locations into here, and then the second haul out of the second round of nursery babies was 432, amounting to an interesting number. I think it's interesting because one of my previous bins from just a couple months ago, based on all of our guesses, and that's how these numbers were arrived at, by the way, it was like this is the average of 5 or 6 different people's guesses at how many worms were hauled over and released on the first go around, likewise on the second account. So the fact that we've got this number is really just a bunch of math, and everyone's best estimates averaged together. But if you read this number here backwards, 928, that's the estimated population that we had in another of my recent systems. So I don't know. Call me weird when it comes to numbers, but I just seem to spot these little patterns, if there's patterns here to be seen at all, but just a little curiosity. So yeah, the 2 feedings were applied at the time of the worms being added. So the feeding this time does not include worms. Let me show you what I've got in store. It's going to be coffee. And it's going to be a little bit of my latest concoction of worm chow. And I've also got a little bit of bonus bedding to include with that feeding too. Maybe some grit as well. New bins like this can probably use the grit. So, alright, let's get into the worm bin already, right? Let's stop all this chit-chat. Let's start worm farming. I always like the way the moisture remains underneath a piece of plastic in your worm bin. It just seems like so much more of the bin is that much more hospitable to that much more worm traffic, It just seems like there's fewer areas where the worms are not going to go because of excess dryness. But now that the summer months, the more humid summer months are rolling in, there's less furnace activity, and I always think that it's my furnace that causes a lot of the dryness in my house in the wintertime. Not to mention where I live, at least here in central New Jersey in the United States. My area in the summertime tends to get a little bit humid. Perhaps not as bad as other places down south that I know are terribly humid. I mean, I've been to Florida in the summertime, and I know that's a place that I would not be able to be in the summertime if it weren't for air conditioning. So I'm just peeling back the center area of this bin, which is where we applied the last feeding. It looks like one of the little pieces of vegetable that they received is one of those things where there's slightly more hard or dense, tougher material coming down off of where the stem was, but all that softer stuff that they were able to nibble away has been cleaned out. And then this all gets eaten over time, gradually. It's just that the soft stuff is always first to go, and then tougher stuff takes a little bit longer. I do remember the feeding, and I expected something like this to take a while, because we'll keep seeing this for quite some time until they get that broken down. It'll be recognizable that way too for a while. But I think some of the other stuff that we put in here were very leafy things, which you know, it's only 10 days, but it's possible that they could have left no remains of that stuff. Something's going on here, and it could very well be them polishing off whatever leftovers there may have been to be seen, although I don't really see anything other than that little stem and that little part of the stem that surrounds it that has the tougher material on it. I always really like watching the breakdown of one of those, by the way. They're so cool. I don't know why I get such a kick out of it. I guess it's just the advanced knowledge that it is going to take time, and just be patient with it anyway, so you're not like expecting it to be gone the next time. You're just knowing that it is gradually going, but it's going to take numerous check-ins to see it get fully consumed. So I definitely made a lot of space down here in this bin, and since we did that, I think we'll include a lot of bedding. How does that sound? I think that sounds like a good idea. So here's my bedding, and it's just more of the stuff that you see in here already that's partially been eaten already. It's just shredded paper combined with leaves, combined with other little things. I sometimes throw some castings in here to give the whole shebang a little bit of kind of biology, if you will, a little bit of microscopic activity in here already working before it gets given to the worms, and moisture. But you know what? That just reminds me of something that I had intended to do in here, and I totally forgot. But it's something that I've been doing at the end of my videos, which is to apply this mosquito dunks solution. That's the product name in the stores. I think the chemical name is BTI, which is the shortening for some sort of a bacteria name. And it's the stuff that you prevent gnats, mosquitoes, other types of pests with. And somebody had a really good point. They said, you know, the insects are laying their eggs on the top surface, so even before you disturb one thing, come in with your BTI solution, treat the top surfaces, which is where all the eggs for the insects are probably deposited, and that way the stuff is directly applied to its target, and then you can proceed with stirring the whole thing in, because now the stuff that I'm really targeting with this stuff is just everywhere, rather than being in a predictable place where I can definitely, you know, target my offenses against it, or defenses in this case. I don't even know what the right way to think of it is, but it does feel like a defense, because it does feel like your system's a little bit under attack when it's like you want to have worms, but you've got worms plus all kinds of flying insects hanging out too. So let's, I guess, better late than never. I think I'll just go ahead with applying this stuff now. My squirt bottle's not as efficient as it could be, so I have to wait for the trigger to return back to home position before I could get the next squirt in. But let's get a little bit of this in here. Maybe we'll spray a little bit more at the end too, but I thought that now we'll just try to get some of it in here right off the get-go. Maybe I'll get in the habit of, you know, making it first on the list of things to do. Maybe I got to apply a little bit of cooking oil to the piston on this pump too. In the past, I would always just come in here with my BTI after I had placed in some of this fresh bedding, and then just kind of douse the fresh bedding. Use that as sort of the sponge into which the stuff would be placed. I don't know. I'm not sure where the logic behind that was, to tell you the truth. So now, I don't know, I was just playing around. I was thinking that I might use this filter that's down here, the empty one, to filter the BTI, so those little crystals or whatever they are that the stuff comes with, so that hopefully I'd be able to like filter that stuff out and it wouldn't end up clogging the pump on the spray bottle. But I just ended up using a napkin. This is what I ended up using as my little filter to clean out my BTI solution. So we've got two new coffee filters here to use. Why don't we bring back the old one that had been serving the function of feeding zone indicator? We'll use that older one as additional bedding down here within the feeding area. Maybe we'll tear up one of the other ones, one of the new ones too, but we'll save one to become the replacement feeding zone indicator. That's a good bit of coffee, yeah. So that was really, that's not how loaded one of my coffee filters would normally be. That was, you know, both of those filters combined into one. And I was curious if I'd be able to fit it all, and I somehow managed. Now this powdered looking stuff, it's just fine chopped, fine ground eggshell, and I'm including it as not so much as a food item per se, but it's more of like a food, I don't know, supplement. Well, basically, it's something that the worms need to digest their food and their gizzards. So, they'll typically pick off little fragments of rock or whatever when they're feeding out in the wild, but in a place like this, if I'm giving them shredded paper, there's not a lot of tough grit that they can use to go hand in hand with their feeding to work down the foods I'm giving them. So, different people use different substances as the grit in their worm bins. My preference is the eggshell. So now, before we move in with maybe a little bit more bedding into which we can mix the worm chow we're going to give them, why don't we begin incorporating some of this other bedding material here. So like I said, this was my makeshift filter for making sure I didn't get the BTI solution along with all the little chunks that ends up in the BTI solution after you throw in one of those cookies. Now, if you're unfamiliar with what it is, the material looks like this, and as this stuff starts to melt in the water, it leaves behind these little fragments, and that was what I was worried about getting into the pump and the spray bottle. And I guess this is the part where I just start getting my clean hand dirty. Or do we skip it? Because I don't have to tear up all this paper into small fragments. For that matter, I can even show you how we left this bin last time. We wanted to use up this big piece of cardboard, and we didn't want to go crazy, fragmenting it into small pieces. So we broke it up into a few pieces, but we didn't go crazy making them tiny or anything. So there's plenty of good size chunks of cardboard and paper and whatnot in here serving as bedding already. So no harm in including a couple more somewhat larger than normal pieces. It'll all go eventually. It's just the speed at which things get broken down. It can be pretty significantly dependent on the particle size of what you're giving them, So if you've got a piece of carrot and you give it to them, they'll have to work their way through that whole thing before they're nibbling the very center of the material that the carrot's made out of. But if you chop the thing up, it's all fair game, every last shred of it. So that's just the whole idea behind, taking what you're going to give to the worms and, if possible, crumbling it, breaking it, whatever it might take to turn it into something that's got nice small particle size. All right, what else do we need? Oh yeah, let's go with another handful or two of this stuff into which we can sprinkle our worm chow. And I don't know, am I being overly generous here? I always like the idea of going a little bit nuts with the bedding in my bins, because you can never go wrong with adding, lots and lots of bedding. I don't even want to express it as too much, because I don't know if there's, possible to have too much. I guess it is possible to have too much, if you're only trying to set up a space for maybe a few hundred worms, and then you end up going in there with, 10 gallons of fresh bedding. You might be expanding the space a little bit beyond what's necessary. Because to a certain point you want to balance the overall size of the environment, I think, to the number of worms you're working with, and perhaps keep it on a little bit shy side, where maybe there is just a little bit of surplus room where the worms will feel that they've got extra space to move into, or with the knowledge that there's plenty of space available, perhaps even increase their population as a result of that. I guess that's usually the ultimate goal of providing worms extra space to roam in. I was just curious how these outer edges are doing. Since we're covering with that bubble wrap, it should be protecting most of the bin from losing any of its moisture too quickly. So I think we're safe, or should be pretty safe. It wouldn't be too unusual for the materials on the very top surface of our worm system here to get a little bit dry once in a while, at least in the very beginning. But we're doing a pretty good job, I think, protecting it from losing too much to evaporation by having that bubble wrap on top. So here too, we'll just take another quick peek over here. It seems almost like there's perhaps a little bit more moisture. I didn't really recall how the bubble wrap was resting on top. I wonder if there was maybe a little bit more of an air gap over here and better coverage here or something like that. I don't know. But it's still so early, we're just talking about a whole bunch of bedding everywhere. Obviously, casting's starting to develop all over the place, but we're still in the infant stages of this fairly new system. Yeah, I guess in future feedings we'll come back in here with fruits and veggies and kitchen scraps other than coffee, but today I just happened to be in surplus mode when it came to coffee, so that's what they got. And I did recently revamp my supply of worm chow with this new ingredient. I threw pecans. No, not pecans. What did I put in there? Cashews. I don't know why I keep mixing up what I put into there, but my latest worm chow that we just fed is like 50% cashews, and I'm just curious to see what kind of a reaction it gets from the worms. I've only had 1 or 2 other places where I've applied it so far, so this will just be another one of my first opportunities to observe how the worms go with the nuts. I did do an early test video showing, not only some of the pulverized nuts laid into the worm bin to see how they react to it, but I also threw a couple full, in the case of the cashews, a couple of full cashews in there too alongside each one. And I can't remember, 10, 12 days, whatever amount of time we'd given them. They did quite a number on those nuts, so I think they like it, and the nuts do seem to have a good tendency to break down pretty quickly. So, yeah, I think we're in good shape when it comes to feeding them stuff that's got nuts in it. So I think we're at the end of the video. So this is now feeding number 3 on day 20 for my, I don't know, there's no novelty here so far. I guess just the initiation date of the bin is the only novelty about it so far. So maybe we'll come up with some sort of interesting test or something to do in here to help set it apart from the other bins. But for now, it's kind of a vanilla, boring, everyday bin, and we're just gonna, handle it as such, if nothing else more interesting becomes of it. All right, everyone, thanks so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you leave. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.